So here is our first FRQ for Unit 1 that I'm going to go over the scoring guideline for. At least one person asked in the progress checks that you be able to see like the actual digital copy as well. So if you want to see the digital copy, then all you need to do is Google AP Statistics 2010 Scoring Guideline Form B. And then this is question 1 on that. I would still like you to watch the video because I just like to talk about things that might not be listed in the scoring guideline or emphasize things that you might not have noticed. But if you want to see the paper or the digital copy as well, just Google 2010 AP Statistics 2010 Scoring Guideline Form B. So here, the first part asks you to compare the distributions of the concentrations of aldrin amongst the 3 rivers. So remember, anytime you're describing a graph or comparing a graph, don't forget your SOCs. That's what I have written down the side, SOCS plus context. Remember the first S is shape, then outliers, center, and spread. If you do this when you describe a graph, every time, no matter what, then you will have all of the checkpoints. So this is for describing and for comparing. The shape of the distribution, so here's my answer. The shape of the distribution of river X appears skewed right, river Y appears approximately symmetrical, and river Z appears skewed left. None of the graphs have any outliers. The median concentration of aldrin for X is greatest, approximately 5.2 ppm, followed by Y, approximately 5 ppm, and then Z, approximately 4.3 ppm. The range follows the same order as the medians. X is greater than Y is greater than Z. X is approximately 5.4, 3.5, and then 2.1. So if you read their description, it's going to be similar. It's not going to be identical. Let's look at the scoring guideline to see what check marks they looked for. So part A is scored as follows: essentially correct if the response correctly describes in context the center, shape, and spread of all 3 distributions. So the center, so the median, I described it in context, so the median concentration, so I did that. Shape and spread. So I did the shape, the center, and the spread. And makes a comparative statement involving all 3 distributions for at least one characteristic. Specific numerical variables are not required. So what I always do, so here's a comparison, is greatest for at least one. What I say to do whenever you're comparing distributions, state the shape and outliers for each, state and compare the center and the spread. It might or might not be necessary, but if you state the shape, the outliers, and then you state and compare the center and the spread for all the distributions, you should always, plus you do context, you should always have everything that they're going to be looking for. So make sure you have all of these things. And it says specific numerical values are not required, but the fact that I have them doesn't hurt anything. Remember, the spread can be the range or the IQR. So if you chose to talk about the IQR instead of the range, that's totally fine. Comparison would be the same. X is greatest, then Y, and then Z. So I have extra stuff, but I'm not missing anything. And I don't know what check marks they're going to be looking for. Let's see what partially correct is. Partially correct if you mention. So partially correct if the response does not warrant an E, but it includes all 3 of the following. You mention all 3 distributions, so you talk about X, Y, and Z. You didn't just describe one graph. You correctly describe at least 2 of the characteristics, center, spread, shape, of at least 2 of the distributions. You include a correct comparison of at least 2 distributions for at least one characteristic. So you had to have some sort of comparison. You had to talk about at least 2 of the characteristics, but you could have forgotten one of them. But you had to mention all 3 at some point. Or you could have gotten partially correct if the response describes all three characteristics of the three distributions, but you didn't make a comparison. So if you talked about the shape, the center, and the spread, but you failed to make a comparison for at least one feature, that is also a partially correct. And then they didn't count off for outliers, but remember, you should describe outliers even if there aren't any, just to be safe. It doesn't hurt to have an extra sentence, but it could hurt to leave that sentence out. Part B asked you to make a stem plot. So for your stem plot, make sure you have a title, make sure you have a key. Should look something like that. You don't have to have commas. I put commas, but notice they did not put commas on theirs. Should be in order from least to greatest. You should not have skipped 6, even though there wasn't anything on 6. They don't usually have you make a graph. This question is older and it was on the alternative form, Form B. So they don't usually have you make a stem plot, but I would be thrilled if they asked me to make a stem plot on the AP exam, and you should be too, because stem plots are very easy to make. Let's check what features we needed to get credit. Part B, essentially correct if a reasonable stem plot. That includes a leaf unit key. So here's my key. You don't have to have the ppm, but you do have to have 3 line 4 equals 3.4, or you can use any number. It doesn't have to be that number. And then includes a correct description of at least 2, oh, wrong one. It just says that. It's not necessary for the key to include the measurement units. Partially correct if you have a reasonable stem plot without a leaf key. Incorrect if an unreasonable stem plot or a graph other than a stem plot is provided. So if you forgot what a stem plot was and you made a different graph, you did not get any credit in this case. And then part C is on the next page. Oh. So I got E here, E here. Part C, essentially correct if the response includes a recognition of the gap in the stem plot. So I have, there's a large gap between 5.6 and 7.3. Or if the response comments on bimodality and specifies where the mode/clusters occur. Okay, so that's interesting. That's why I included both things. You couldn't just say bimodal. You had to indicate where the gap was or indicate where the clusters occurred. So just bimodal was not enough to get you essentially correct. You had to, that was enough to get you partially correct if you indicated that there's a gap or the bimodality, but you did not give an indication of where the gap occurs. That was a partially correct. I indicated the gap and I said bimodal, so I'm good. So note the scoring system counts part A as a double weight. In other words, an E counts as 2 points in part A and 1 point in the other parts. Similarly, a P counts as 1 point in part A and half a point in parts B and C. So part A was worth twice as much as the other parts. So I'm going to go back to part A and I'm going to put times 2. So here we're going to add up our points. So essentially correct here is worth 2 points, partially is worth 1 point. So plus 2 here. Essential is worth 1 point here, partial is worth half a point. And then partial or essential is worth 1 point here and half a point. That's interesting. I wish they did that more often. So I had all three, I had 4 points total, so I had 4 out of 4. So you just add up how many points you had, that's your score. If you had, say, a 2.5, you look at it holistically. Did I forget something minor or did I forget something major? What was I losing points for if you're at half a point? And then they would round you up or round you down. They never do half points. Well, we'll see what they do this year with our quarantine, but they typically do not do half points. This is an older scoring guideline, so things might be a little bit different now. I tried to pick the older questions because we hadn't seen them before.